Russia makes shocking revelation Jesus was black. The definition of Jesus as black is crucial for Christology if we believe in his continued presence today. Taking our clue from the historical Jesus who is pictured in the New Testament as the oppressed one, what else, except blackness, could adequately tell us the meaning of his presence today? Any statement about Jesus today that fails to consider blackness as the decisive factor about this is a denial of the New Testament message. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus reveal that he is the man for others, disclosing to them what is necessary for their liberation from oppression. If this is true, then Jesus Christ must be black so that blacks can know that their liberation is his liberation. The black Jesus is also an important theological symbol for an analysis of Christ's presence today because we must make decisions about where he is at work in the world. Is his presence synonymous with the work of the oppressed or the oppressors, blacks or whites? Is he to be found among the wretched or among the rich? Of course, clever white theologians would say that it is not either or. Rather, he is to be found somewhere in between, a little black and a little white. Such an analysis is not only irrelevant for our times, but also irrelevant for the time of the historical Jesus. Jesus was not for and against the poor, for and against the rich. He was for the poor and against the rich, for the weak and against the strong. Who can read the New Testament and fail to see that Jesus took sides and accepted freely the possibility of being misunderstood? There are several things to note here. First, that Cohen works with the absolute binary of black and white. Second, these categories of race have little or no basis in biology, but clumps together a variety of issues around culture, country, language, and skin color, and the modern emergence of the term was rooted in classifications from the colonial era in the 18th century. The language of race is, ironically, rather racist. Thirdly, this does not prevent Cohen from imposing his ideological construction of race on the New Testament and the picture of Jesus we find in the Gospels. And fourthly, this leads him to a skewed reading of the texts themselves. Jesus was for the poor, but, perhaps uncomfortably, he came to the marginalized to call them to repentance, as a doctor comes to ministry to the sick, and he was also for the rich and respectable. Indeed, he was not particularly poor, in socioeconomic terms, himself. It is rather sad that anyone offering a critique of Cohen's reading is quickly dismissed as a clever white theologian. Cohen is clearly aware of the need to relate the claims of black theology to the New Testament, but I don't think he actually succeeds. What evidence is there that Jesus' identification with the oppressed is the distinctive historical kernel in the Gospels? How do we know that black theology is not forcing an alien contemporary black situation on the biblical sources? These questions are important and cannot be waved aside by black theologians. Unless we can clearly articulate an image of Jesus that is consistent with the essence of the biblical message and at the same time related to the struggle for black liberation, black theology loses its reason for being. It is thus incumbent upon us to demonstrate the relationship between the historical Jesus and the oppressed, showing that the equation of the contemporary Christ with black power arises out of a serious encounter with the biblical revelation. Black theology must show that the Reverend Albert Cleage's description of Jesus as the Black Messiah is not the product of a mind distorted by its own oppressed condition, but is rather the most meaningful Christological statement in our time. Any other statement about Jesus Christ is at best irrelevant and at worst blasphemous. Birth. The appearance of Jesus as the oppressed one whose existence is identified exclusively with the oppressed of the land is symbolically characterized in his birth. He was born in a stable and cradled in a manger, the equivalent of a beer case in a ghetto alley, because there was no room for them in the inn, Luke 2 verse 7. Although most biblical scholars rightly question the historical validity of the birth narratives in Matthew and Luke, the mythic value of these stories is important theologically. They undoubtedly reflect the early Christian community's historical knowledge of Jesus as a man who defined the meaning of his existence as being one with the poor. Again, notice the anathematizing of all alternative views. And again, there is a systematic misreading of the text in order to fit with the narrative. Jesus wasn't born in the ghetto, and his birth was not in particularly poor circumstances. In context, Cone's ambition is clearly to reclaim Jesus as the Messiah for oppressed black people who feel as though Jesus has been made white, but in doing so he seems to make absolute claims which appropriate Jesus for a particular cause, instead of correcting previous bias by reading the text better and recognizing that none of us owns Jesus for our own agenda.